Ready for a deep dive? We're taking a close look at Bonnie and Clyde today. You guys sent in some great excerpts from their Wikipedia page, which is a good place to start. Try to figure out what's Hollywood and what's real about their lives, right?
Yeah. And it's fascinating how they still capture the imagination after all these years. I mean, you've got love, crime, a dramatic end. It really resonated back in the Depression era.
I feel like everyone's seen the 1967 movie, the one with Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway. That kind of colors how we see them, doesn't it?
It does, though even that newer movie, The Highwaymen, the one about the lawmen, that gives a different slant on things.
Totally. To really get them, you've got to think about that world they lived in.
The Great Depression, you had so much poverty, joblessness. People didn't know what to do. And this was when those public enemy types were big, like Dillinger or Pretty Boy Floyd. It was almost like people wanted someone to root for, even if they were breaking the law.
Yeah, it's hard to remember that side of things when you see how movies make Bonnie and Clyde seem so glamorous. What gets me about Bonnie is she wasn't just a gun moll. This was someone who wanted more out of life.
Which makes her even more interesting, right? You've got her wanting to be an actress and her poetry, like the story of Suicide Sal, or that one that's basically their story, The Trail's Ends, like you see right into her head.
Those diary entries, so sad. She was only 18, writing about being lonely, wanting a different life, and she loved photography. It's like she becomes a real person, not just some gangster's girl.
Totally. You can't help but wonder what led her down that path. Was it love for Clyde? Or wanting excitement? Or just like the depression was so bad she didn't see another way out? It's probably a bit of everything, I bet.
Almost like she should have been famous in a different way, but it ended up being wanted posters and all that. Then there's Clyde. His story's dark, too. Grew up poor in West Dallas, in trouble young. And then there's that Eastern prison time. That seems like when things really changed for him.
Easton was brutal. He was assaulted in there, and he got back by killing the guy with a pipe. Even mutilated himself, got those toes chopped off so he wouldn't have to do hard labor. That messes you up.
No kidding. You wonder how desperate someone has to be to go that far. Some historians think that's where he went from small-time cook to, like, a hardcore criminal.
Yeah, John Neal Phillips, he's a historian. He says prison did that to Clyde. Like, it made him want revenge on the whole Texas prison system, all the stuff Clyde did after. Phillips figures it was him trying to get back at them.
So almost like by becoming this big outlaw, he was grabbing power back after they tried to crush him.
It's an interesting theory, right? You can't understand the choices he made without thinking about what made him that way. It's not about glorifying the violence, but it makes you think about what creates a person.
Yeah, there's real people behind the mugshots and headlines. People with feelings and all that, shaped by their world. And it wasn't just them either, right? There was a whole gang, people we don't hear much about.
Right. You've got W.D. Jones, he was in the gang, and later on he'd talk about how it wasn't glamorous like people thought. Then there's Buck and Blanche Barrow. Blanche would describe it. Always on the run, needing beer, bandages, just trying to live normal lives when everything was crazy.
It makes them seem human again, Like they had worries, dreams. It's easy to forget that.
Exactly. Each of them mattered in the gang, doing their part. There was Raymond Hamilton, another big-time criminal, and of course Henry Methvin. He's important later on. And then you've got the lawman who's practically as famous as them, Frank Hamer.
Frank Hamer, the Texas Ranger. You know that saying, one riot, one ranger? That was him. He had this reputation, meticulous, wouldn't give up. This wasn't just any case for him.
Oh, no. Frank Hamer was a legend himself. One riot, one ranger. That was him to a T. He was known for being tough, careful, wouldn't stop until he got his man. He felt it was his duty to bring them down.
And it all ends in that showdown in Gibbsland, Louisiana, May 23rd, 1934. We got these accounts from the lawmen. They'd planned the ambush carefully. Henry Methvin's family helped even. Some say Hamer made a deal with Methvin's dad to make sure he upped.
It was chaos when it happened. Over 130 rounds fired. The car was full of holes. No one's 100% sure who shot first. Some say it was one of the posse jumpy. Others say it was Bonnie and Clyde themselves. But it was a bloodbath. No two ways about it.
And that Ford V8 they were driving all shot up. It's like a symbol of how violent their lives were,
It's a grim reminder of how things were back then. But it also makes you think, why are we still so drawn to them, even with all the violence? It's weird, isn't it? They were killers, but people still love their story. It's like we can't help but make them seem romantic.
Maybe it's that outlaw thing. Wanting to be free, make your own rules, even if it gets messy.
Oh, the newspapers back then, they made sure that story sounded exciting. Those pictures, too.
That one of Bonnie with the cigar, right? Leaning on the car, holding the gun, all cool.
That's the one. It's like their poster, all tough and rebellious. But there's something about that picture.
Really? Now I gotta know.
So some folks, even one of the guys who was there when they were caught, they said the cigar was added in later, like some photographer's trick to make her seem tougher.
Wow. Makes you think what's real, right? Even all these years after, just a picture can change how we see things.
And it wasn't just pictures, how they died, all those bullets, putting their car on display, all shot up. People ate it up.
It's like everyone wanted their own Bonnie and Clyde story, put their own spin on it.
That whole Wild West idea, too. Did they even get a chance to give up, or did the lawmen just want them dead?
Especially since no one knows for sure who started shooting first.
Well,
Adds to the whole mystery.
exactly. Fact, fiction, it's all mixed up. Makes you wonder what really happened.
More interesting than if it was simple, You gotta think, though, what if Bonnie and Clyde were born at a different time? Not during the Depression, when being an outlaw was almost cool. Would things been different?
People have been asking that question for years. We'll never know. But it shows how much your time period shapes what you do.
It wasn't just their world that shaped things, though. It also changed how the police worked back then, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. This was when the FBI was just getting big. Bonnie and Clyde, those other gangs, they made the law change how they did things.
So, in a way, they changed things just by being criminals.
Kinda, yeah. New gadgets started showing up, like cops having radios in their cars,
Okay.
and that thing where crooks would scoot across state lines, figuring they were home free.
Yeah, that didn't work so well anymore.
The world was catching up, No more hiding out so easy. And think about it, just a few months after Bonnie and Clyde are gone, you've got Dillinger, Pretty Boy Floyd, Babyface Nelson, all dead. That whole era was over.
It's like their stories are all connected, Gives you a snapshot of America back then. But you know what I like? The little details. The stuff you don't always hear about.
I was hoping you'd say that. Like, did you know the posse who caught Bonnie and Clyde? They didn't get all the reward money?
Seriously, they risk their necks and get cheated out of the cash.
Makes you think maybe that's why they took souvenirs off the car,
Speaking of, what happened to that Ford? It's practically famous itself.
Get this. They sold it back to the lady who owned it. Some woman in Kansas. Ruth Warren, I think.
Can you imagine? Here's your
Yeah.
car back, had a few dings.
It was a tourist thing for the longest time, went all over, people paid to sit in it, bullet holes and all.
Wild.
Yeah.
A real piece of history. So, where did it end up?
You're not going to believe this. It's in a casino near Vegas. Behind glass, of course.
From outlaw life to the Vegas Strip. What a story.
It never ends, does it?
It's crazy how these little things still grab people. But we've covered a lot. Bonnie and Clyde, what they mean now, how the world made them who they were, even how the cops changed because of them. But why do we still care? Almost 100 years later, what's the appeal?
The million-dollar question, right? Maybe there's not just one answer.
Maybe it's that we love an outlaw, or we want to be free like that, or that love story, even with all the violence, it gets to people.
Or maybe it's simpler. It reminds us that history is just people, good and bad, making choices that echo even now.
Well put. This has been wild looking at Bonnie and Clyde's world. We'll be back in a bit. Back again, still digging into Bonnie and Clyde. Right before the break, we were talking about why their story still gets to us. All the twists and turns, it's more than just cops and robbers.
Yeah, it's not like some simple lesson, right? It's about how the life you live, it comes from what happens to you, what's going on in the world, even just dumb luck, all mixed up.
And for them, that world was the Depression. People were hurting, didn't trust the system. Seeing Bonnie and Clyde raise hell, maybe it felt good to some folks.
Oh, for sure. You can't separate their story from all that. The Depression, then you had movie stars getting big, those gangster pictures, it all made them famous, even if it wasn't the good kind.
Like, their story was what people wanted, without having to live it. Right. But even with that, you can't forget the people they hurt. That's the part you don't see in the movie so much.
Absolutely. It's easy to get caught up in the legend, but those crimes, they left real pain behind. People who lost someone, that matters.
It's like, the history isn't simple. It's not just dates and names. There's always more to it. That's what makes it stick with you.
And with Bonnie and Clyde, it even goes past how they died. Like, everyone thinks they're buried together, right? Love story, all that.
I always thought so. Isn't that how it usually goes?
Turns out it's not true. Bonnie's family, they didn't want Clyde near her at first. Then they came around, but the cemetery, they couldn't make the plots work.
No way. Even after they're gone, there's still surprises. It's like what we remember, the stories we tell, it all becomes part of it.
And people love those stories. Every little bit, almost 100 years later, it still makes you wonder.
It really does. I guess that's what we've learned, right? Don't believe everything you hear. Ask questions. And the best stories, they're always more complicated than you think.
That's the truth. The past, it never really leaves us. It's part of who we are now. And yeah, sometimes it takes those wild ones living on the edge to make you see things differently.
Well said. Bonnie and Clyde, what a trip. Until next time, everyone, keep digging into the past. There's always something new to find.